Juveniles are sometimes treated like adults for their crimes. They get real-life consequences that don't seem to care about how young you are. For example, this 14-year-old was sentenced to life without parole for a robbery, or the 16-year-old who also got life for attempting to rob someone. Then there's the case of a 13-year-old who got life without parole back in 2001. And just when you think it can't get crazier, there are even younger convicts who somehow found themselves behind bars for a long time. In this video, we'll look at some of the toughest sentences given to juvenile criminals. Kenneth Young was convicted for 4 armed robberies he committed in Tampa, Florida, in June 2000. At the time, he was only 14 years old. Young was involved in the robberies with his mother's crack dealer, Jacques Bethea. Bethea planned and carried out the crimes, while Young was more of a follower. He didn't hold the gun or interact directly with the victims. In one robbery, when Bethea threatened to rape a woman, Young stepped in and stopped the situation from escalating. Despite his role being less severe, Young was tried as an adult under Florida law, even though he had no prior serious criminal history. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. This was part of a broader trend in the 1990s, when many states changed laws to try more young people as adults due to rising violent crime rates. However, in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Graham versus Florida that life sentences for juveniles for crimes other than murder were unconstitutional. This decision made Young and 77 other inmates eligible for early release. While in prison, Young showed remorse for his actions and worked to better himself. He earned a GED and became a model prisoner.
I take full responsibility for my actions and my role in these crimes. I have lived with regret every day as a civilized human being.
You got to have faith. You got to.
I am not a monster or a person who is not trying to change.
During his resentencing hearing in 2011, Young's mother, Stephanie, expressed deep regret for her past actions, including her crack addiction, and begged the court to allow them a chance to rebuild their family. Despite their efforts, Judge Daniel H. Sleet rejected their pleas and sentenced Young to 30 more years in prison, with credit for time served and 10 years of probation.
You will not get it, sir, because you do not deserve it.
The next kid was even younger than Kenneth Young when he received a similar sentence. However, unlike Young, he was granted a second chance at freedom. Lionel Tate. Lionel Alexander Tate is known for being the youngest person in the US to be sentenced to life in prison without parole. In 2001, at just 13 years old, he was convicted of first-degree murder for the death of his 6-year-old cousin, Tiffany Unick, in Florida. On July 28, 1999, Tate was alone with Tiffany while his mother babysat her. The two children were watching wrestling when Tate's mother told them to be quiet. About 45 minutes later, Tate told his mother that Tiffany was not breathing. Tiffany had severe injuries, including bruises, a fractured skull, broken ribs, and a swollen brain. These injuries were so severe that the prosecution compared them to falling from a 3-story building. The judge described Tate's actions as cold and cruel. Under Florida law, Tate was convicted of first-degree murder, even though the prosecution didn't need to prove that he intended to kill Tiffany. The law only required that Tate's actions were reckless enough to result in harm to a child, which was enough to convict him under the felony murder rule. The case was controversial because Tate was only 12 at the time, and his victim was much younger.
Throwing him in jail for the rest of his life is not helping him. It's not helping society. It's certainly not helping, Tiffany Unick.
Many criticized the law for convicting children without proving they meant to cause harm.
To do what is necessary to lead to justice for Lionel Tate and justice for the juvenile justice system.
In fact, the prosecution supported Tate's appeal for a lighter sentence.
I realized that Tiffany Unick had justice, but I made no secret by the fact that I found life in prison with no parole inappropriate as a sentence.
An appeals court overturned Tate's conviction in 2004 due to the absence of an evaluation of his mental competency prior to the trial. He was then given a new plea deal and released on house arrest and probation. However, in 2005, Tate got into trouble again. He was charged with armed robbery and assault after threatening a pizza delivery driver with a gun. In 2006, Tate accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 30 years in prison for violating his probation. He later pled guilty to robbery in 2008, receiving an additional 10-year sentence. Tate is currently serving time in Florida's Hamilton Correctional Institution Annex. Just a year older than Tate and the same age as Young, the next kid committed a crime beyond imagination. His sentence was as severe as the acts that led to it. Joshua Phillips. Joshua Phillips was convicted of murder when he was 14 years old. On November 3, 1998, he killed his 8-year-old friend and neighbor, Madeline Clifton. Phillips and Clifton were playing baseball when he accidentally hit her in the eye, causing her to bleed and cry. Fearing his father's anger, Phillips panicked and dragged her into his house to keep her quiet. He hit her with a baseball bat to stop her from screaming, then hid her under his bed. Later, when he found out she was still alive and moaning, he killed her by cutting her throat and stabbing her 7 times with a knife. Clifton was reported missing later that day, and a search was launched. Phillips took part in the search and tried to ignore what had happened. On November 10th, Phillips's mother found Clifton's body in her son's room and called the police. Phillips was arrested at school and confessed to the murder shortly after.
I wanted desperately to see Maddie before she was buried. The funeral home director said too much time had passed, but I did not want to remember Maddie that way. I could not say goodbye to her. I could not kiss her or hold her.
Phillips was tried as an adult, and his trial began on July 6, 1999, lasting just 2 days. The defense didn't call any witnesses, and the jury took a little over 2 hours to find him guilty of first-degree murder. This verdict angered Phillips's father.
The state to prosecute a 14-year-old for first-degree murder is ludicrous and obscene. Mr. Shorstein and Mr. Plotkin should be ashamed of themselves in this matter. Their actions were carefully plotted for the press to further their own political gains.
He was sentenced to life in prison without parole because he was too young for the death penalty.
I'm certain that on Judgment Day, you, Joshua Earl Patrick Phillips, will be given a far harsher sentence. Until that day, it is the sentence of this court that you be delivered by the sheriff of Polk County into the custody of the Department of Corrections of the state of Florida to be confined in prison without the benefit of parole for the rest of your natural life.
During the trial, the defense sought to present brain scans from a doctor, which revealed brain damage potentially affecting his judgment. However, the judge decided not to allow this evidence. Since his conviction, Phillips has been in prison at the Cross City Correctional Institution. He earned his GED and later took college courses by mail. He works as a paralegal, helping other inmates with their legal cases, and also tutors fellow prisoners. He plays guitar in a band and takes part in religious services, meditation, and yoga. During a resentencing hearing, he apologized to the victim's family.
Don't pretend to know or understand your pain or to grasp a void that I have created in your lives. I can say this. I do understand pain. I did something horrible. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened.
Phillips' case has been covered in the media, including a 1999 documentary on 48 Hours called Why Did Josh Kill? And appearances on Sword and Scale and Morbid, a true crime podcast. Like the others we've discussed, the next kid was sentenced to life, but as unbelievable as it may sound, he's now living as a free man. Terrence Graham. At the age of 16, Terrence Jamar Graham was involved in an attempted robbery of a barbecue restaurant in 2003. He and another teenager, both wearing masks, entered through an unlocked door. During the robbery, one of the teens hit the restaurant manager with a metal bar, causing a head injury, but no money was stolen. Graham was arrested and charged with serious crimes, including armed burglary and attempted armed robbery. He pled guilty and was sentenced to probation, with the first year spent in jail. Less than a year later, in December 2004, Graham faced another arrest for his involvement in a home invasion robbery with 2 other men. They forced their way into a home, held the occupants at gunpoint, and ransacked the house. Graham was also involved in another attempted robbery that evening. After a police chase and crash, he was arrested, and several guns were found in his car. Graham was accused of violating his probation, and after a series of hearings, the court found that he had violated it by committing the home invasion and other crimes. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the armed burglary and 15 years for attempted armed robbery. In 2005, Graham challenged his sentence, arguing it was unconstitutional under the 8th Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. The case eventually went to the US Supreme Court, which ruled in 2010 that life sentences without parole for juveniles in non-homicide cases were unconstitutional. The court decided that juveniles possess a greater capacity for change and should not be subjected to the harshest penalties. As a result of the Supreme Court ruling, Graham's sentence was reduced to 25 years in prison. He was released in 2024 after serving over 20 years behind bars. Much like Graham, the next kid's now walking free after serving his time. In January 2010, authorities accused 13-year-old Keyshawn Mann of killing Jamel Stokes, his mother's boyfriend, in Kentwood, Michigan. Before the shooting, Keyshawn had shown a 9mm handgun to a friend and said he wanted to use it to kill his father because of abuse toward his mother. On January 25, 2010, Keyshawn shot Stokes in the back of the head while Stokes was on his laptop, checking his Facebook page. At first, Keyshawn lied to police, claiming an intruder had killed Stokes. Later, he admitted to the shooting.
It was his only way out. He didn't know no other way out. He was a young 13-year-old kid. He just turned 13. That's his only. He didn't know anything else to do.
Keyshawn's lawyer argued that the shooting was an accident, but the judge decided there was enough evidence to charge him with murder. In June 2010, Keyshawn pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to stay in a youth institution until he turned 21, with the possibility of being moved to adult prison later. Stokes had abused both her and her son, though Stokes' family denied these claims. Keyshawn told a therapist that Stokes had abused his mother and physically punished him and his brothers. Keyshawn's defense suggested that the abuse led to the shooting, but the prosecutors pointed out that there was no evidence of prior police reports or abuse calls to the home. At Keyshawn's sentencing, a fight broke out in the courtroom between the families of the victim and the accused. Keyshawn's mother, Lakeisha Mann, said that no one understood the abuse her son had allegedly suffered from Stokes. This angered a man in the audience, who began shouting insults at her, causing others to stand up and charge at each other. Deputies quickly stepped in to calm the situation.
I couldn't help myself. I couldn't take it no more. I'm hurting bad enough as it is, and then not to express yourself when you're hearing things that's not correct.
I was trying to show a scene and disrespect the court or anything but I'm going through a lot too. And I was just being there for my sister and my nephew, so that's why I kind of reacted like the way I did.
Keyshawn was sentenced to 8 years in the Muskegon River Youth Home, a juvenile facility 110 miles from Grand Rapids. He will stay there until he turns 21. If he does well, he could be released early. If not, he could face another sentence, possibly being transferred to an adult prison with a minimum of 13.5 years, or even life. In February 2013, when Keyshawn was 16, the youth home staff reported that he was doing better than expected. He had made good progress in managing his anger and emotions thanks to support from his mother and grandmother. Keyshawn's lawyer, Fred Johnson, suggested that he might be eligible to move to a less secure part of the facility, but Assistant Prosecutor Vicky Seidel disagreed, saying the plea deal required him to stay in secure housing. Despite everything, Keyshawn expressed regret for his actions and said he was learning from his mistakes. His lawyer was hopeful that Keyshawn would turn his life around and make positive changes to atone for his crime. In December 2017, when Mann turned 21, Judge Daniel Zemaitis decided to release him because he had shown good progress and improved behavior. Mann's mother, Lakeisha Thomas, was there in court and hugged him after the decision. At the time of his release, Mann had been studying online at Mid-Michigan Community College and wanted to continue his education at Grand Rapids Community College. He also had a positive meeting with Stokes' father to settle any issues between them. The next kid also committed some really serious crime. However, it was her reaction to her sentence that got people talking. Kai Andrea Cook. Kai Andrea Cook was involved in a series of crimes, mostly carjackings and attempted carjackings, which became widely known because of a viral video of her sentencing. In March 2017, Cook, a student at Mainland High School, used the Meet Me app to trick 28-year-old Perry Nida from Palm Coast into meeting her in South Daytona, claiming she would provide sex and marijuana. Nida brought his friend, Emmanuel Manny Purcell, along. Cook's real plan was to rob them. While Cook was in Nida's truck, her boyfriend, Kendrick Bass, jumped into the back seat wearing a ski mask and holding a gun. Purcell tried to stop him, and Bass shot him twice in the abdomen. Although Purcell survived, he was badly injured. It was later discovered that just 2 days after this, Cook and Bass were involved in another carjacking. At her sentencing in June 2017, Cook and her mother were assured by her lawyer that she wouldn't go to prison. However, the judge sentenced her to 20 years, which triggered a dramatic courtroom scene. Cook broke down crying, and her mother screamed in despair, leading to both being carried out.
Sentence you to 20 years in state prison.
The emotional courtroom video went viral online, gaining millions of views. It showed Cook and her mother's outburst, requiring bailiffs to intervene. Later, new attorneys took on Cook's case for free and successfully got her initial plea withdrawn in August 2017, citing miscommunication with her previous lawyer. Cook then pleaded no contest to charges of carjacking, attempted carjacking, and aggravated battery, facing a possible life sentence. In April 2018, Cook was sentenced to 11 years in prison, followed by 20 years of probation. She agreed to work with prosecutors against Bass, the man involved in the attempted carjacking she had planned, and also agreed to share the responsibility for paying restitution. However, Cook's legal problems didn't end there. Despite receiving instructions not to contact co-defendants, prosecutors accused Cook of violating the terms of her deal by speaking to Bass. Investigators claimed she spoke to him on 2 separate phone calls. In January 2023, Cook went back to court, asking to have her conviction and sentence overturned. Her lawyer, Anthony Candela, argued that her previous lawyers hadn't properly presented information that could have reduced her sentence. However, the judge denied her request, and her sentence stayed the same. The next kid's crime was a brutal murder, which he tried to explain away by blaming his anger issues. Eric M. Smith. At 13 years old, Eric M. Smith killed 4-year-old Derek Joseph Roby in Steuben County, New York, on August 2, 1993. Smith was on his way to summer camp when he saw Roby walking alone to the same camp. He lured Roby into a wooded area where he strangled him, hit him with a rock, and poured Kool-Aid into his wounds. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxiation. When Roby's mother went to the park to pick him up around 11 a.m., he was missing. After a few hours of searching, Roby's body was found. On August 8th, Smith confessed to his mother that he had killed Roby, and his family contacted the police. Smith was tried as an adult, becoming the youngest person to do so in New York State history. Despite medical tests, no clear reason for his violent behavior was found. Smith had been a social outcast, bullied for his appearance. A defense psychiatrist said Smith had intermittent explosive disorder, which causes violent and unpredictable behavior.
I knew I had a problem with anger. I knew I do. I might be, just happy-go-lucky now, and someone get me mad.
His father also talked about his anger issues.
I remember him coming up to me in the kitchen. He was really upset, and he was crunching his fists and shaking. He said, "Dad, I need help. I feel like I want to hurt somebody." And I said, "Hold it. Let me explain something to you. When I got angry, when I was at your age, the best thing to do was I grabbed the bag in our barn and I just start beating on it."
However, the prosecution's expert disagreed, saying this disorder is rare for Smith's age, and instead diagnosed him with ADHD. On August 16, 1994, Smith was convicted of second-degree murder. On November 7, 1994, he received the maximum sentence for juvenile murderers at the time, 9 years to life in prison. While in jail, Smith publicly read an apology letter to Roby's family, expressing deep regret for their loss and saying he wished he could trade places with Roby to let him live. Smith initially served 3 years at Brookwood Secure Center, a maximum security prison for juveniles. He was then moved to an open prison for young adults. In 2001, he was transferred to Clinton Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison, and later served time in various medium security prisons in New York, including Collins, Gowanda, and Woodbourne Correctional Facilities. Smith was denied parole 10 times between June 2002 and January 2020 due to public safety concerns and strong opposition from Roby's parents. After 27 years in prison, he was granted parole in October 2021. Although his release was planned for November 17, 2021, it was delayed because he didn't have an approved residence. Smith was eventually released on February 1, 2022. The case of the next kid had an impact on how the justice system treats juvenile offenders across the United States. Evan Miller. Evan Miller was 14 when he and his friend Colby Smith killed his 52-year-old neighbor, Cole Cannon, in 2003. They entered Cannon's trailer, stole about $350 and a baseball card collection, and hit him repeatedly with a bat. In 2006, Miller was tried as an adult and sentenced to life in prison without parole. His friend, Colby Smith, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after testifying against him. Miller's case changed how juvenile offenders are sentenced in the United States. In 2005, 2005, the Supreme Court banned the death penalty for juveniles, leaving life without parole as the only option for capital murder cases. Miller's lawyers argued this was unfair, and in 2012, the Supreme Court ruled in Miller v. Alabama that mandatory life without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. Judges now must consider other sentencing options and factors like age and circumstances before deciding on life without parole for juveniles. The Supreme Court's decision in Miller v. Alabama was part of a series of cases that says juveniles should be treated differently from adults in the justice system. While the court didn't completely ban life without parole for minors, it ruled that such sentences should be rare and only given after a detailed hearing. These hearings must consider certain factors such as whether the individual shows potential for rehabilitation and how their age influenced their actions.
I think children are uniquely more than their worst act. They have quintessential qualities and characteristics that a decent society, a maturing society, an evolved society, we believe is constitutionally obligated to recognize and protect.
Miller had been automatically sentenced to life without parole for a murder committed during an arson, but this automatic penalty didn't allow for any discretion. As a result, he was granted a new sentencing hearing. Critics of juvenile life without parole often cite cases where minors received such harsh sentences for less severe crimes. For instance, numerous children have faced convictions for felony murder, a crime in which they participated but did not directly cause a death, or in certain instances were not present during the incident. Studies show that before the Miller ruling, about 25-33% of the 2,500 juveniles sentenced to life without parole were convicted of felony murder. Miller was resentenced to life without parole in 2017, and this decision was upheld in 2021. He is now appealing the verdict. If you enjoyed this video, click on the card showing on your screen right now for more videos.